Hey folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. And in this episode, I'm very excited to welcome our guest today, João Estevez, aka Your Friend Estevez. Now, Your Friend Estevez is a synth music artist with vocals, guitars, harmonies. Some songs are chilled, some are upbeat, some are sad. And he's recently released the album Opposite Forces Volume 1 on Retro Reverb Records, a label that I'm also affiliated with. Put my teeth back in. He's going to share with us his musical background and the songwriting and music production processes behind recent album Opposite Forces Volume 1. Hello, João. How are you? And thanks for joining me.
Hello, Mark. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Brilliant. I know it's in the background there, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see in the background João's got a lot of synths there, which we'll dive into in a bit, and also a story about some Pioneer equipment that we're having off air, which will be quite interesting to delve into. But what I want to start off with first is your life, your musical life, basically. How did it all start? When did you start getting into music as a musician, per se?
Thanks for asking that. And I love to tell that story because it's very personal. As I was a little boy, my parents, they sang in a choir, and they used to go to rehearsals every week, and I used to go with them. So what happened was that, I just, I was playing around in the corner and the choir was rehearsing, but if they had a break, I'd jump on the organ and I would ask, hey, can I play the organ? And so that led to them kind of getting me into lessons, and so I did organ as well as piano lessons while I was a kid, and that was the foundation of my musical education. Later in life, I always tell people, during the 90s, piano wasn't cool, guitar was cool. So I told my parents, I don't want to do the piano anymore. I want to learn guitar. And then by myself, I started learning guitar, and the rest is history. Like then teenage years in school, it's like we wanted to make a band, myself and a few of my friends, and it was like, it's like everyone played guitar, no one played anything else. So it was sort of like, oh, did anyone ever play drums? And I said, oh, I once sat in a drum set. All right, so you're the drummer now. So that's how I started drumming. And eventually I ended up, having, the most fun as a drummer. I played in many bands, and until very recently when I started to go back to my roots, go back to the keyboards and the keyboards. And then that's what you see. I got a bit addicted. I went through a bit of a phase that I acquired too much gear, but I'm loving it. I love the synth aspect. I love the synth instrument. As a synthesizer is a fabulous instrument. It sort of mixes all the things I like, the science, the music, and that's what I love about it. It's just you can be really geeky about it, and you can be really artistic and instrumental about it.
Fantastic, yeah. So going back to your sort of childhood there, so your parents were singing in the choir, you played the organ, then you did the classic there of starting to play the guitar because you thought it was cool and learnt the guitar, and I think I did a similar thing, but I carried on playing the guitar and didn't really get much better. I got okay. I did myself a disservice. And then you joined a band, you started a band and played drums. Now drummers, I bet you were a hot commodity as a drummer. I think you mentioned there you played in a lot of bands, because I know how finding a good drummer is hard, very hard.
Yeah. It's I don't know why, because for some reason there's always an abundance of guitar players, and many of them tend to be good. So I now live in Dublin. I grew up in Lisbon in Portugal, but I've been living in Dublin for almost 10 years. And Dublin is most of Ireland is very musical, and there's a big traditional music scene. So there would be a lot of guitar players, a lot of I suppose guitar would be the easiest of the traditional instruments. I'm not a connoisseur, but that's my assumption. And so you'd have a lot of guitar players, a lot of folk music, and yeah, but you don't have a lot of drummers. I suppose it's probably a function of it's an instrument that it's hard to practice.
Yeah,
because it's so noisy. It's not a cheap instrument either. And then, as someone once said to me, I once met a guy on the street. He was busking, and I was talking to him. He said, "Oh, do you play drums?" He said, "Look, we're looking for a drummer." And the first question he asked me is if I was a stoner. I said, "Why did you ask me that?" "Oh, all drummers are stoners, man. They can't find a reliable guy that is not always smoking weed." So it's I don't know why. Maybe, and then there's to add to that, it's drummers. Some people see drummers as a non-musical instrument. It's sort of like if you can't play an instrument, you play drums. But to play drums well, it's actually it's a lot of work, as much work as any other instrument.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I know what it's like with drums, having been in a band with a drummer, and knowing the amount of money that's spent, and also rehearsing. You're very lucky if you can find somewhere where you can rehearse, A, at your own leisure, and B, that probably doesn't cost you money at the same time. Yeah. Or you've got very forgiving neighbours or parents. Yeah, I remember playing we were rehearsing in my friend's bedroom, and he lived in a terraced street. And his neighbours, I don't blame them, because we were terrible as well. So I don't blame his neighbours for not liking us. But no, that's really cool. And then you moved on to the synth. So I noticed there in the background, I mentioned it just now. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the synths in the background. Can you just give us a bit of a rundown of what you got there?
So on this side, I have, I'll start from the top. So that's drum machine section, that's Drum Brute from Arturia.
Yeah.
And then on this side, I have the TR-707.
Oh, jealous.
Most of my songs would be running out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the Matrix Brute. It's not necessarily, it's what they call paraphonic, has 3 voices. So 3 oscillators, and I love it. It's really raw. It's brute. I love the brute. It has actually a knob there called brute for the brute effect. It just turns up like this sort of different drive on the low end. It's really good for bass lines. I love it for bass lines. I love it for arpeggios. It's really good for that sort of stuff. And then this is like lately my workhorse is the Prophet 5, where I get most of my melodic lines. And then what else we have here on this? I'll turn the camera. On this side we have, this is the DX7 from Yamaha. Those lovely Rhodes and E-piano sounds,
mm-hmm.
Whitney Houston, that sort of sounds. I have a little sampler. It's very laborious to use this stuff from Akai, the S series. It's very hard to, a lot of deep diving into menus, but it's great. I have a bunch of the old discs, and it sounds really good. And this is like an old. This actually belongs to my wife. It's I don't know if you can. It's one of those really old. It's from Yamaha, and it has really tiny keys, and that's where all the kids probably would learn how to play back in the 80s. But it has some really cool sounds, especially, drum rhythms and all that. So you can get that sort of like really old vintagey style type of sound.
Yeah. Mate, I'm massively jealous. I love that you've got a TR-707, a Prophet 5 and a DX7. I'd love to have just those 3. To be fair, that collection is pretty impressive. What's your favourite one out of the lot, if you had to pick one?
The Prophet. It's just... maybe I'm just saying that because it's the one that I spent most money on. But it just sounds... that's why I call it my workhorse, because I could work with just this one. The other ones have more like specialized sounds, and this one I can get a good bass line out of it. I can get pads, I can get a lead. It just sounds beautiful. and it's very easy to work with as well. So you can extract and design a sound very easily without, the matrix is quite laborious. Like if you're looking for, the sky is the limit, but to get to the sky, you have to do a bit of experimentation.
Yeah.
So I guess, if I had to pick one, this one, just because I can get most things out of it.
Ace, I think what you said there about experimentation is key, because it goes back to what you said earlier about how you like the synthesizer, because you got that scientific element as well. And there's a massive amount of science that goes into like the sound synthesis and sampling. For example, I know with the DX7, because it's one of my favorites, with the FM synthesis, the frequency modulation, and I can get lost in that for days and still not come out with anything that sounds any good, but I'll still like tinkering and play around with it because I like the scientific element of all the routing capabilities and whatnot. And if you're anything like me, I can just spend hours noodling, and I go into shops as well where they sell them, and I probably just annoy the people in there purely because I'm in there just moving envelopes and changing filters and resonance and cut-offs and stuff and creating these horrible sounds, but I love it. So I bet, what we'll do is we'll come on to it in a bit when we touch on the songwriting aspect of it and delve a bit more into how you use the synths in the actual songwriting process. But with regards to your sort of journey as a musician, it's a sort of a new question now I'm asking in these interviews. To the point where you are now as a musician, have you encountered any sort of like struggles or any challenges along the way?
Well, I guess from that question is, the answer to that is risk-free, because I didn't make music my main occupation. I don't need music to pay my bills. Let's call it that.
Yeah,
it is my passion, but it's I have other passions, and some of the other passions pay for the bills, thankfully. But so I suppose when it comes to having been challenged, I never really felt like this is a make it or break it sort of challenge. Never been in that position.
Yeah,
where I've been probably sometimes disappointed is when you put a lot of work into something, or and I've been in this position that I'm about to describe, a number of times with the bands I played with, which is sometimes we record an album, it goes into reviews, and some are good, some are bad, that break your heart, and you see it out. This is back when you'd see it out in newspapers or even in really prominent blogs, and then you kind of feel like that's it. It didn't work out, but I kind of gone past that point at the moment. First of all, synth music, it's hard. It's not going to make anyone rich ever, but it's a lot of fun to make, and that's the perspective that I have. It's a lot of fun to make. I suppose the challenges for me are, production levels and the marketing aspect of it, and continuously doing that cycle of composing songs, mixing them, getting them released, and then huge effort into social media and marketing and trying to see what works and what doesn't work. I guess the biggest challenge at the end of the day for me is staying motivated to continue those iterations when, in fact, you're it's not often that someone sees a big return out of it, and not even monetary return. It's sometimes you can get a few thousand listens, and sometimes you can get only a dozen, and you just have to live with it and be happy with what you get.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely true, and it's something I've mentioned a few times on the podcast in these interviews. Sort of like you mentioned there about synth music being fun, and how you got past that sort of barrier of critique, as it were, and taking it almost like personally. Because I know I've been there when I was in a band, and we'd send an album off for review, and then you get not absolutely panned. I think we did once or twice. But it's how you get beyond that, and then I think once you get beyond that, that's when you start seeing it as more fun, I guess. Can you remember what it was? I mean, you mentioned there about how you sent an album off for review, and then you get some negative feedback. At what point did you decide, you know what, this is just for fun, I'm not really bothered about the reviews, etc., and I'm just doing this for me?
I think it was mostly when I started doing music with this with your friend Estevez. That's when I decided, I'm gonna do this because I want to do songs that I consider fun, and I'll write them, regardless of releasing them or not. I'm gonna write them. And then I found a community that had like-minded tastes, and that's that led to discovering the whole synthwave scene. But I have made that decision. I'm going to invest in this genre, and I'm going to write these types of songs, and just because it's a lot of fun to write them. And I guess I was coming from a cycle where I had been a drummer for maybe 2 decades, and towards the end I started writing more songs, and writing in a band sometimes can be quite, there's a lot of sometimes clashing opinions or conflict in terms of, I like that, I don't like that, and it's for good and bad. It can turn into, sometimes very effortful mind state of always trying to kind of first get buy-in from your mates and then get buy-in from the public. You get a better result, but I think I got to a point I just wanted to write songs and that I liked to listen, which they really didn't fit the bands that I had played with. So I guess, it's to answer your question, it's when I started playing for myself, the things that I love to play. That's when I got past, that. Then I had the goal. The goal was just, I'm just going to have fun.
Yeah, that what you said about the band, and how when you're in a band and you're writing, there can be conflict. I've experienced it, and it was a discussion I had probably about an hour ago with another interview that I did, and it said the exact same thing. But when you're writing music yourself and you're writing it for you, there's a lot more fun, and I think there's probably more freedom as well, I would say. But there are obviously pros to being in a band as well, which we could do a whole episode on the difference between solo artists and a band, But one question I've got before we move on to music production and songwriting, you mentioned there about staying motivated. How do you stay motivated to write music?
I love writing music. That's the part that I love. The part that I find really hard is, when you release songs, then you have to promote them, and it is a lot of work. It's important work, probably as important or even more than when you want to have a successful brand. You have a product, but then if you don't pitch that product right, it's not going to make it anywhere. So it's kind of like I'm conflicted. I feel like if I want people to listen to my music, I have to do this. So I try to put a bit of work into that. I'm not great at it, but I'm improving, I suppose. No. When I go back to, and I see this as a cycle, for example, I'm about to release an EP, and I know, okay, here comes a phase of promotion and putting a bunch of effort into that. And I'm kind of almost like, oh yeah, but that means after that comes, writing phase. And I just love that. I just love to sit here where you can see that I am and just write songs and play with the sounds. So I get motivated. I'm always thinking about, okay, what's the next phase? And, I'll do this bit, and then I'll get to the part that I absolutely love. And then when that part is done, I'm kind of like, okay, no. Then I forgot all about, how laborious mixing can be, and so you keep going. The other thing that really helps me is also, as you mentioned, look, we're both part of Retro Reverb, and it keeps me motivated to see people who are on the same label to keep pushing music. So it's the social aspect helps a little bit. You sometimes I want to, okay, I'll keep doing stuff because the other guys are also doing stuff. So we kind of tag along with each other and keep pushing more singles and more albums and so on.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that, because the discussion I had just now about how when you see other artists releasing music, and then it almost not peer pressure, but then you feel like, oh man, I need to get something. I need to get writing and writing as well, because if they're releasing, I need to be releasing. And you got to find that happy medium between writing music and releasing music of a good quality, and then, or writing music just because I need to release something, and then it's not quite. You got to find that balance between the two, which can be tricky. But no, you're right. Being on a label as well and seeing other people release music, it is very inspiring. And, you know, it is quality music as well. So for the audience listening, I mentioned it in the beginning then about Retro Reverb Records. Do go check out Retro Reverb Records and the artists on there, because there's a whole host of quality music. And I'm sure Cole will like the fact that I'm giving him a shout out as well. I'm sure he wouldn't say no to that, knowing Cole. But you mentioned about releasing an EP, so I think what we'll do is we'll circle back to that once we've discussed the current release, because I think this is a good opportunity just to give that a little plug. So about your music production and songwriting, so we've got the synths behind you there. So when you're writing a song, how does it all start? Do you start on the synths, the hardware, or do you start in the box? How does it all begin when you're writing a song?
It really depends. I don't really have a formula. I can tell you a few songs started, for example. So believe it or not, some of the songs I'm about to release now, I wrote the idea on an iPhone, on GarageBand on an iPhone, while I was in a business trip 2 years ago. And I was waiting to go to dinner, and I had a couple of hours to kill, and I was in a hotel bedroom, and I was like, oh, GarageBand is cool. And I had an idea. Sometimes I have ideas, I just need a place to kind of drop them as I'm singing them out. And some of those songs came out like that. A lot of the time, I may be playing around here, and I discover a patch in a synth that I absolutely love, and then I tweak it, and then you start playing, and you play a melody or a sequence of chords, and then you kind of think, okay, this could be something. So let's record that for a second and drop it in a bucket of ideas, and I'll get back to that. Throughout the year, I tend to do that a good bit. So, you know, I capture an idea, record it on the phone, record it, you know, if I'm close to the computer. I drop it into a folder where I have a bunch of ideas. And sometimes I go back to the buckets, and some are still good. Some I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? It's good to let a few days go by so that your brain refreshes. But and the third aspect is sometimes I straight in the box and I grab just a MIDI keyboard because I want to do something very quick. It is a lot quicker to just grab a MIDI. You plug it in, you have your plugins on your computer and your DAW, and you just start at it. So it really depends. I guess for me it's a factor of time as well. Depends where I am. I try to, if I feel inspired, and I do feel like there are particular weeks in the year that I'm really inspired, and I could get like 5-6 songs out of me in a week. The ideas, and they can come by really, really quickly. And yeah, it tends to happen every year, thankfully. And sometimes I'm out of ideas, and I go as far as to, just randomly pick, let's say, a key, and then say, okay, pick a scale in this key, let's play at it. And generally I like to, okay, let's pick a key that I normally don't start writing on. So let's say, some D sharp, okay, D sharp major, okay, let's see what comes out of it. And sometimes, especially in the keyboard, in the piano, it's quite interesting because, I think very visually, and sometimes you start looking at patterns in the chords, and especially when you're playing around a certain scale, and you kind of start seeing like really interesting patterns and experimenting just by, okay, let's try this out, and let's try that out, and sometimes you find like really interesting changes, chord progressions, and yeah, that's what I love about the keyboard. I used to compose a lot more on the guitar, but I found myself always using the same chord progressions or the same figures of progressions, and I think the keyboard gave me back sort of different ways to look at chords and progressions and scales. Yeah.
That's great stuff. Excellent. So you've got GarageBand and an iPhone and this Sketchpad that you can use, which is amazing. I made the switch from iPhone to Samsung, well, to Android, and I need to find something similar because at the moment all I do is kind of like sing really crudely into my phone and record it that way. So I need to get something down myself. And you've got this bucket of ideas, which is fantastic. How big is the bucket? Is it like a hard drive folder? I'm assuming with ideas.
Yeah. It's not, look, and there's stuff there that doesn't fit my synth projects. Same with lyrics. I have, a bucket of lyrics, and they don't always fit, the genre. It's not very big at the moment. I've been using some of those ideas. I like to go back, and if they're rubbish, I delete them. If they're kind of good, I'll use them right away and drain the bucket. Yeah, maybe have like 10 ideas there at the moment. But like I said, I don't want to make it like a library where I just go back because, I'm in a different, I'm a year older than last year. So a year, 2 years ago, an idea that I have may not mean anything to me anymore, or I may find that, not refined enough. And as we're always learning, as time goes on, your expectation of what good is kind of goes up a notch. And so, sometimes I look at those ideas and feel like, oh, no, this is before I learned about this and that, and I don't want to go certain directions anymore either. So I don't mind starting over again and just building ideas from scratch.
Cool. Well, my question was going to be there with regard to the bucket of ideas. What do you do with it? Do you keep what you don't use, or do you delete it? And you answer that one there in terms of you delete it and you go through. I think it's a great way to work, isn't it? Having a bucket of ideas and putting those together. So, with regards to the actual composition of your music and the songwriting, you mentioned chords there and a chord progression. So, do you start with a chord progression, or does it really depend on what you're noodling around with? It might be a bass line, or how does that usually start?
At the moment, it's the chords. They have to be catchy immediately. Generally, it's chords plus rhythm. So if let's say if I'm on the phone and I'm able to do, okay, here's a sequence of chords, put a simple rhythm there, just powerful enough, and see, okay, does this have potential? That do I feel like I want to see this in a song? And those two are enough for me to kind of imagine the potential. Because the bass line you can kind of imagine it's there. You kind of, or you can hum it like dun 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 dun, or if it's something a little bit more elaborate. But the chords seem that's for me, that's the essence of the songs I write. You need to have, pick a verse, and then is going into the chorus. Is the chorus really catchy? And can you think of a bridge there, or middle eight, something nice to kind of add a bit more color, and that's it for me. I can imagine the whole song coming up with just that.
That's great. It echoes what a conversation I had earlier today. I keep saying this, and also last week as well, with regards to the songwriting and using chords to start. And once you get the chords in place, you've pretty much fleshed out not the majority of the song, but you know where the song is going to go. So you mentioned there about having the verse and then the chorus, and then where you're going to take that song, which is amazing. So you've created this sound palette, you've got this song put together. So moving on to the actual production side of things and mixing, where do you start with that? I'm intrigued to know, like, what instrument group do you start with in your mixing and production process?
I tend to do sort of a pre-production versions, and what that means is I try to very quickly get to what the song could sound like, and the quickest way for me to do that is just first work in the box. So I try to make, without spending too many hours, let's try to make the song quickly with just using plugins. If I feel like, okay, this is cool, this feels like it's going to be a song, then what I try to do is I start recording with the hardware. So, for example, and sometimes it's useful because sometimes you can just send MIDI back into the synths if you want to just get a more colorful sound out of the hardware, or and especially the drum machines. So you can just send it out there, and route back and forth the audio. And then, things like bass lines, and drum machines, I rely more on MIDI just to make sure they're, really tight. And then if it's pads or something else, then I'm comfortable recording that just for my ears. That's pretty much the whole way that I do things lately. And funny enough, sometimes I can't find a way to do with hardware what I have sometimes you find a plugin that's just like, oh, this is beautiful, and you get used to that sound, and you're like, okay, but I have no way to do that here. So so sometimes I just let it, let the plugin in there, because it may mean a lot to me to have that particular sound. And it's, I'm not a purist, but I do enjoy working with the hardware. That gives me a lot of satisfaction to be able to feel like I'm playing with the hardware rather than just the computer.
Yeah, so you're kind of like doing your pre-production in the box and then moving to hardware, and a combination of the two for the final product. So I noticed on your Instagram that you posted a video of you playing drums. So are the drums on your releases, are they all sort of organic drums, for want of a better way of putting it, actually you playing?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because drums, because I played drums for so many years, I just love drums, and I love to, because I'm able to play drums, I always felt like, I could put a little bit more into my compositions in terms of the rhythm, and give it a little bit more of the human side, or making it a little bit more random by its human nature. And recently I got a set of E-drums, so for the volume 2, the one that's coming up, I actually recorded the whole thing on drums, on E-drums, and it sounds immediately different. It doesn't sound maybe as EDM as you may imagine, because it has a lot more notes, but I just love the way that it sounds. I feel like, this is me. I finally found a way to kind of, I went back to playing drums, but I do it in a way that is it's very carefully played, to make sure that it's, I'm just not playing, it's not like I would be playing acoustic drums. This is still, it's still electronic music, so it's me performing an electronic music song with drums. And I guess I was a little bit inspired by a couple of albums I listened to recently, and they have this really cool mixture of drum machines as well as real drums. And I was like, wow, this is, such a niche, but it's so what I value, the fact that someone actually went to recording drums in an electronic music album. And I thought, okay, if this is possible, maybe I could do it as well. So I tried it. I like the way it sounds, so we'll see.
Fantastic. So you mentioned there about how you're recording drums, E-drums, and it's a more accurate representation of you as an artist. What were the two albums, if you don't mind me asking, that influenced you to record the way you did?
So one of the guys from Justice, Gaspard Auger, French. So he recently released an album of what he calls his bucket of ideas, funny enough. Songs that he had that really didn't fit the Justice project. And so he has a really, really good album, in my opinion. It's sort of a mix of, there's lots of synth compositions in there. There's lots of French house flavor, and I was really wowed by that album, because it kind of sounds a bit like Justice in some aspects, but then on others it sounds like, okay, this is quite different. And I, loving being an instrumentalist myself, I could see how it didn't fit in a classic hardcore EDM project, but it feels a little bit more refined. It's funny because this coming EP that I have next month, I was showing it to Cole, and he said, like, dude, it's a little bit different, but in his words, he says it's like synthwave jazz. That's his way of seeing it. I can see why he says that. I guess some of my choices aren't necessarily the most mainstream ones, but it is what I did the songs because I love to listen to them in that way.
Mm. I love that. I love the idea of synthwave jazz. That's fantastic. One song I want to dive into in particular, actually, is the song "This Time." And that's the single from Opposite Forces Volume 1. So just a quick chat about this before we move on to the EP. Can you tell our audience a bit about the songwriting and composition behind "This Time"?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember where it came from.
Put you on the spot.
No worries. I'm trying to think what came first, the lyrics or the... because I remember the lyrics when they arrived in my brain. It was basically the chorus. I'm getting back to the lyrics this time. No crime, and this came, and I thought, like, oh, it rhymes, and the metrics of the rhyme are kind of interesting. And I thought, oh, this time, no crime. I thought, that'd be cool in a song, And I started building a song around that idea. But I had the instrumental before that, and it was what I was going after was that sort of more like slow synthwave, almost like if you think back at movies and there's that the romance scene and you have a really slow drums but still very powerful. If you think of Top Gun and the love scene, I forget the title of the song during that, but it's kind of like powerful, really full of reverb drums in the back and just really smooth DX7 chords over it. And I wanted to do a song like that because I hadn't really explored that side of things. So, And then it ended up being, a little bit jollier. It kind of, the rhythm, then it's not as slow as what I was describing, but it ended up, that was the final product, what you can hear now. And I really like the song. It's... For me, it's what I was describing earlier. The chords caught my attention, and I thought, oh, I'd love to hear this again. Let's build a song around this. And it's one of the songs I'll happily listen to it, every once in a while because I just like the way it sounds.
Great stuff. Yeah, it's a great song, and I was obviously privileged enough to listen to it before you released it. So you started with you had the instrumental bit beforehand, and then I love the idea that you sort of wanted to have that slower tempo song. And you mentioned that the Top Gun sort of influence, the Top Gun sort of sound that you're going for. Then are you thinking of Berlin, the Berlin track, the main song from Top Gun? Yeah, that's a great song. Great song.
It's and also because, I had this idea, the whole Opposite Forces was to, I'm going to do an album, a 2-part album that the first part is going to be all happy and, it's going to be smooth, very easy listening. And the second part is going to be a little bit darker, probably, going into the realms of dark synth and I think it coincided nicely with...
Yeah, I mean, That all sounds good. I think you cut out a bit at the end there. Can you just repeat that last part? I think the microphone cut out a little bit.
Yeah, I was saying that, this 2-part album, the first part was, I was focusing on making it really soft listening, happy songs, upbeat, and because I knew that the second half of the album was going to come out, and I wanted to do something darker, more like dark synth towards the end, which coincided nicely with me starting to play drums again, because it really brought that energy back. So it was nice in the end that I ended up playing real drums for it.
Excellent stuff. So that's great to hear that like the darker energy, you kind of like bring in that more human side as well, which is really cool. So it kind of leads on nicely to the next question. So you mentioned there about how you've recently started playing the drums, and obviously you've got all the synths behind you as well, and obviously the in the box gear. Are there any tools or resources that make your songwriting easier, or music production as well? What is it can you recommend that makes it easier for you?
Look, I work with Logic, and I just got used to it. I learned how to mix songs in it. I learned how to, and I used to be a Cubase fan ever since, ever since I heard of it. I switched to Logic just because I did a course, a mixing course, and and the author of the course was using Logic, and I was kind of okay, cool. This is. I got used to it. So for me, Logic, out of the box gives you a ton of plugins, even instruments. Same with GarageBand, really, right? You get all those instruments, synths. You get so much out of the box that you can quickly get an idea down on getting an idea down on the computer. You can listen back to it. On top of that, then obviously, there's a number of plugins that I constantly use, and a while back I acquired the Arturia plugins, some of the vintage synths, and sometimes it's great. For example, it has a Prophet 5, so sometimes what I do is, if I want to test an idea, I use a lot of the Prophet 5 plugins, or multiple tracks with the same plugin, and because I know I'll be able to replicate it back with hardware eventually. It's given me plenty of ideas as well of how to explore the gear as well. So in essence, those two are essential for me. Everything else is, it's nice to have, but must have for me is a good DAW that you can master, and a couple of plugins, instruments that you can get your sound out of.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah, I agree with Logic. I did something similar. I wasn't a Cubase user. It's probably the only DAW that I haven't really used. Shame on me. I moved over from Pro Tools to Logic purely because it is easier, and I had a MacBook, and it's cost effective. I know the idea being that you pay less for Logic, but you expend a fortune, or spend a fortune rather, buying a decent MacBook or something along those lines. Yeah. But I use it much like you mentioned there about the DAW as my sketch pad to get ideas down, and then I build from that. And the Arturia suite's amazing. I remember I used it a while back, and for whatever reason I stopped. I can't remember now. But I think it's a fantastic plugin suite. Have you got the suite where you've got all the synths?
I don't think. Well, it's been a couple of years more, perhaps, since I got it. I don't know if I have all the synths. But I remember definitely testing most of them, and I end up using always like the Jupiter 8, the Prophet 5. Occasionally, I explore a tiny bit of the other ones, like the ARP 2600. Yeah. But generally, I don't go that far because sometimes I just want to get a quick result. So I go to the well-known ones, and I know, okay, I'm gonna get a good sound out of this, and I don't have time to be spending 2 hours now flicking through all the patches until I find something that may or may not be what I'd like. So it's really down to be productive with the time that I have.
Yeah. If I remember rightly, does it have a Fairlight emulation? Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it does. I remember playing. I lost so much time playing around with that, trying to come up with something decent out of the Fairlight. And much like you, I ended up just using the stock. I say stock's the wrong term, but I used the ones that you use, probably with maybe the Moog as well. I think I was using.
Yeah, the Moog's a great one.
Yeah. Those are the ones I primarily used, and maybe a couple of others. But yeah, I thought, you know what, I'm going to proper get into sound design in this one here, and I'm going to start using the Fairlight. And it's a fantastic machine, don't get me wrong, but I thought, I want to write a song. I don't want to spend hours trying to come up with something and have nothing at the end.
I was just thinking about stuff that I bought over the years that was good value. Are you familiar with samples from Mars?
No, can't say I am.
And so Samples from Mars does this fantastic collection of drum machines. So all the vintage drum machines, they've sampled them, and you can buy it. I think I spent like $30, something like that. So I'm doing free advertisement for them here. But it's and I love it because it allowed me to kind of explore a little bit of those old drum machines without actually having to buy them, and get the really, really good sound out of it. So sometimes what I do, I mix a bit of the 707 with a DMX or any of the other like famous drum machines that, and some of them sound not so great. They're quite raw. But others, you can get a few bits from here, toms from the other drum machine, and then you end up with a result that kind of fits what you're looking after.
Yeah, so you're blending different tones, different drum machines there. Something I do similar to myself. I think there's always a Linn drum in there somewhere, and then it's a DMX, and then there's a 707, maybe an 808, depending on what style the track is. But I very much do the same thing, and I got it from a different place, but it's I've got a sample libraries for each one, and then I went into Logic and used the sample instrument or sample editor, whatever it's called, and created the actual sampler there myself. So yeah, I do very, very much the same thing. So I'm well aware of time here. What I'd like to sort of move on to now, Zhao, is can you tell our audience a bit about, you mentioned it earlier about how it's going to be darker, but maybe a bit more about the up and coming EP.
Thank you. It's only 4 tracks. They're all instrumental, so I'm not singing on any of them this time. And most of them, I was very cautious about making sure that they would have almost like going into dark synth territory, where the drums tend to be a little bit more frenetic, and you have a bass line that's really low end or really aggressive. I didn't go as far as that, but I did really push the envelope a little bit in terms of making it darker. And one of the things that I'm always really careful about in any of the songs that I've been writing lately is that I don't like writing stuff that's just like 3 chords. And this is probably where Cole says, that's almost synthwave jazz. But I always like to make sure that I put in a little bit of my classical education in there, and try to put like an arpeggio that's maybe exploring a really weird sequence of chords, or you change the key of the song towards the end. And while at first it may sound a little bit odd and maybe not in tune with the typical 3-4 song formula for synthwave, that's still what gives me a lot of satisfaction, is musical compositions that aren't necessarily, I know they're not gonna necessarily be the the one-hit wonders, but I need to explore that side of things. I need to put more into it than just your one-hit wonder, which is not what I'm looking after doing. I'm looking after building like complex songs, while sometimes they may sound simple when you listen to them. If you really pay attention to it, if you really listen to all the instruments in the background, there's a lot of stuff happening, and a lot of it is actually the bits that gave me a lot of satisfaction to record or to write. And then this new EP is no exception. There's like a few good minutes of song that aren't even with rhythm. It's just like someone said, "Oh, it reminds me of sci-fi of the 70s and 80s," because it goes into these landscapes where it's just synths, and it's just a composition and lots of effects in the background, and that was part of I'm really enjoying to build those moments because I find them beautiful, as beautiful as the song, the main bit of the song, the chords and the chorus, and that's all great. But I live for those moments that are a little bit different, and yeah, that's always what I try to bring to my songs, and I try to do something that is a little bit different. And I know not everyone will enjoy it, but as I said, I do it. It's my brand, and I'll stick to it.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said earlier, doesn't it? You're making music that you'd want to listen to and that you enjoy. And I think if other people find it enjoyable, great. But you're doing it for you ultimately. And I love the idea of it being experimental and a darker sound. And it's certainly. It's an exciting prospect. Have you got a release? This is going to be my next one, which is like key dates and releases. Have you got a release date or month that we can expect?
So yeah, we'll have a single at the start of November and or late October, and the EP comes out on the 11th of November. So
11th of November. Fantastic. There you go, audience. I will put a link to all of this in the show notes as well. So my next question or opportunity for you really is, João, is where can our audience find you online?
So yeah, I do have a website where you can grab all the links. It's yourfriendestevez.com. Estevez is all S's. So I'm now related to Emilio Estevez with a Z, but so it's estevezwiths.com. And if you just Google that very same thing, Your Friend Estevez, you'll find me. I'm very active on Instagram. I like to post a lot of updates there. But you'll find me on all social media channels, really.
Fantastic. I'll put those in the show notes as well. Lovely stuff. And once again, audience, do go check out all the back catalogue as well, not just the new release, but the back catalogue as well. So a big thanks, mate, for joining me on this today. It's been great spending time with you and going through all your gear as well, which I'm very impressed by, and picking your brains on your production and your songwriting and whatnot. I know the audience is going to get a lot out of it, because it kind of, what's good at the moment is all these conversations I'm having, there's a concurrent theme in them of the chords. Chords seem to be paramount at the moment when it comes to this songwriting game of ours, which is amazing. So once again, a huge thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. It's been great to talk to you over the last hour, and yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Fantastic. I'll speak to you soon, buddy.
See you.